Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in AP English, and we are now into our conversation of Iliad Book 3. We have already given lectures on Iliad 1 and 2. You'll find those at learnstrong.net in the AP folder. In Iliad 1, of course, you have the invocation of the Muse, as we talked about. You have Achilles and Agamemnon going at each other, and of course, by the end of Book 1, we have Zeus and Hera going at each other and then ultimately resolving their conflict in a much different way than, as we said, Agamemnon and Achilles will resolve their conflict. In Book 2, we had the bad dream of Agamemnon sent by Zeus because Achilles asked his mama Thetis to speak with Zeus, and so Zeus is now, against Hera's wishes, going to allow the Trojans to have a bit of the advantage. We also have the catalog of the World War I, as we called it, right? The catalog of ships, the catalog of chariots, and of course the Trojans mentioned. Now the hope, again, just to remind, is you annotate on your own first, Iliad 3, and then use my comments here as a way to kind of help with that one. Reminding you again, our learning theory is that desire to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. And we do that through our annotated process at level 1, summarizing. We'll do that with Book 3 right away. Then we'll talk at level 2, what does the text mean? At 3A themes, at 2A themes messages, at 2B rhetoric. Here again, we're focusing our rhetorical reading on symbolism and irony. We'll have some comments about that. And then finally at level 3A, how can we relate this to other texts, beginning of course with Iliad 1 and 2, since we're in Book 3, and then of course Iliad, and then of course the other kinds of texts that we might relate to. All right, let's do a real quick brief plot summary of Book 3 to get you on board, and we'll play line numbers as well, again reminding you we're working with the Robert Fagel's translation. First of all, lines 1 through 145, we turn our attention to Troy here. Paris starts out this braggart. It's the first time we see him. He is, of course, the reason that we're doing all this fighting, because he stole Menelaus' wife Helen away from Sparta and brought him back to Troy. And when Menelaus sees Paris walking, strutting around, he's excited right away for the possibility of a fight, because Paris is calling out anybody that wants to fight him one-on-one. Paris then decides, never mind. His brother Hector is the one that kind of taunts him into deciding, you know what, I will go ahead and fight against Menelaus. Paris will agree to the duel, and then both sides will agree to end the war with a one-on-one duel. In lines 146 to 291, that's the next scene of Book 3, we meet Helen for the first time. It's our first view. We learn Mrs. Menelaus, actually. And then she's with Priam. She's naming, it's a famous part of the actual title of this book is for Fagel's Helen Reviews the Champions. And you've got Priam, the king of Troy, asking, who is that, and who is that, and who is that? And Helen's kind of pointing them out. And then Helen will ask where her brothers are, and we will be told, which she does not know, that her brothers are dead back in Sparta. They never made the trip. The third scene is lines 292 to 430, and this one is Priam, called from the city of Troy to the front, where a sacred oath is made. Winner takes all, and we're finally going to have a peaceful resolution to this silly conflict that now is into its 10th year. Priam, however, says he can't stay and watch the duel. The duel then is set up, first of all, by both of them dressing for battle, Paris and Menelaus, because of a lottery system where a certain kind of thing jumps out of Hector's helmet. Paris gets to throw his spear first, and he misses. Menelaus throws his spear, but first he makes a prayer to Zeus, and we get a hit. And he thinks that then with this, with the follow-up, with his sword, Menelaus thinks that maybe finally he's going to get this thing done. He shatters his sword on the helmet of Paris. He's dragging Paris away. Aphrodite comes down and will save Paris. The chin strap is cutting into his throat, and then she breaks the chin strap, and then away Paris is taken over the walls of Troy to his bedroom. And now the final scene, lines 430 to 540, Aphrodite returns Paris to his bedroom. She goes and she gets Helen in disguise, and she tells Helen, go to your husband Paris. Helen's having none of it. She says no. She recognizes she's talking to Aphrodite. She actually talks smack to Aphrodite and says, if you want him to have a woman to sleep with, why don't you marry him? I'm not interested in him. And this shows us something about Helen's attitude towards Menelaus. It also shows us something about the futility and the silliness of this whole war. We're fighting on both sides for a woman who doesn't even want to be with the man who brought her to Troy, right? Helen will be forced to return to Paris and to the bedroom. When she's there, Helen actually taunts Paris. She says, I wish that Menelaus had killed you. Pointing out here, by the way, that this is very interesting. We're going to see this layering technique that happens in this poem. Very similar to the way that Hera, for example, taunted Zeus in Book 1. Helen's going to taunt Paris, and Paris will lie. And he says, well, I would have beat Menelaus, but Athena, right, basically helped Menelaus, which is not true at all. And then he says, let's go to bed. Very much like Zeus and Hera. At the conclusion of this scene, you got Zeus and Hera in bed at the end of Book 1. Here in Book 3, you've got Paris sleeping with Helen, and Menelaus searching for Paris, like, dude, I was about to kill him, where'd he go? And then Agamemnon finally saying at the very conclusion of this book, hey, Menelaus won, we get Helen back, both sides agree. And Book 4 will be about how the truce gets broken, because Hera and Athena can't see the war end this way. Okay, so that's the summary. Now, let's look closer. Let's jump into the text itself and enjoy the language. As I've said in all my other lectures, I wish I could just read the whole book to you and exegete it as I went. I just don't have the time. So let's go ahead now and jump right into it. And we'll begin right away with the way in which the troops arrive. So we'll be working now right away. We're told that the Trojans are loud and make lots of noise, whereas the Greek troops, as they get ready, are silent as they come on strong in silence, breathing combat fury, hearts ablaze to defend each other to the death. We then will meet Paris for the first time. I'm at roughly line 17 or 18 or so. Now, closing, front to front, in the onset, till Paris sprang from the Trojan forward ranks, a challenger, lithe, magnificent as a god. We'll understand a little bit later that there's a lot of irony that's being played out here. The skin of a leopard strung across his shoulders, a reflex bow at his back, battle sword at him. Brandishing two sharp spears, tipped in bronze, he strode forth, challenging all the Argive best to fight him face to face in mortal combat. Soon, as the warrior Menelaus marked him, Paris parading there within his big loping strides, flaunting before the troops, Atrides thrilled like a lion lighting on some handsome carcass, lucky to find an antlered stag or wild goat just as hunger strikes. He rips it, bolts it down. This is, again, what we call an epic simile, right? It goes on for a number of lines, even with running dogs and lusty hunters rushing him. So, Menelaus thrilled at heart, princely Paris there, right before his eyes, the outlaw, the adulterer. Now for revenge, he thought, and down he leapt from his chariot fully armed and hit the ground. Now, of course, let's point out what is sometimes referred to as the displacement of some of the narrative structure of the text. Many have used these kinds of ideas to argue that, this thing wasn't put together as one easy, clear narrative structure, because if we're going to have a fight between Menelaus and Paris, it surely isn't going to happen in year 10 of the war. It's going to happen probably early on in the war, right? But be that as it may, we'll have a couple of others of these scenes in Book 3 where, for example, Priam's going to ask Helen, king of Troy, ask Helen, who is that out there? As if he's never seen Agamemnon in 10 years of fighting. You get me? Okay? But soon, as magnificent Paris, again, notice this is the second time he's been called magnificent Paris, marked Atrides shining among the champions, Paris' spirit shook. Backing into his friendly ranks, he cringed from death, as one who trips on a snake in a hilltop hollow, recoils suddenly, trembling, grips his knees, and power takes his cheeks, and back he shrinks. What an amazing simile. In other words, Paris is all excited to fight until Menelaus says, I'm here for you, let's go. And then all of a sudden Paris kind of goes back. And the feeling that he has is when you're walking down a mountain trail and you see, for example, a rattler right next to the trail, and you kind of freak out. It's a great word picture, right? So, he dissolved again into the proud Trojan lines, dreading Atrides, magnificent, brave Paris. And you get the sense, now the third time magnificent is used. Oh, so our poet here, telling a Greek poem, is making fun of Paris. And we're going to have something to say about Paris, as especially it relates to Achilles, right? At one glance, Hector raped his brother with insults, stinging taunts. Paris, appalling Paris, our prince of beauty, mad for women, you lure them all to ruin. Would to God you'd never been born, died unwed, that's all I'd ask. Better that way by far than to have you strutting here an outrage, a mockery in the eyes of all our enemies. Why, the long-haired Achaeans must be roaring with laughter. Whoa, so in other words, big brother's giving it to little brother pretty harshly. They thought you the bravest champion we could field, and just because of the handsome luster of your limbs, but you have no pith, no fighting strength inside you. What? Is this the man who mustered the oarsmen once, who braved the seas in his racing deep sea ships, trafficked with outlanders, carried off a woman, we're thinking Helen here, far from her distant shores, a great beauty, wed to a land of rugged spearmen? Yo, curse to your father, your city, and all your people, a joy to your enemies, rank disgrace to yourself. So you can't stand up to the battling Menelaus. You'd soon feel his force. That man you robbed of his sumptuous, warm wife. No use to you then, the fine lyre and these gifts of Aphrodite, your long flowing locks and your striking looks. In other words, you're great looking, but for what? I mean, it amounts to nothing, he says. Not when you roll and couple with the dust. In other words, when you're dead, nobody's going to care how handsome you were. What cowards the men of Troy! Or, years ago, they'd have decked you out in a suit of rocky armor, stoned you to death for all the wrongs you've done. Now, this is our first insight into both Hector as well as Paris. And notice Hector says, it was a mistake that they ever let you come back to our city with that woman in the first place. We should have just stoned you to death right then and there. And Paris, magnificent as a god, one more time, again the irony, tripping, replied, Ah, Hector, you criticized me fairly, yes, nothing unfair beyond what I deserve. The heart inside you is always tempered hard, like an axe that goes through wood, when a shipwright cuts out ship timbers with every ounce of skill, and the blade's weight drives the man's stroke. So the heart inside your chest is never daunted. Still, don't fling in my face the lovely gifts of gold and Aphrodite, not to be tossed aside the gifts of the gods, those glories, whatever the gods give of their own free will. How could we ever choose them for ourselves? Now, though, if you really want me to fight to the finish here, have all Trojans and Argives take their seats and pit me against Menelaus, dear to Ares, right between the lines. We'll fight it out for Helen and all her wealth. And the one who proves the better man and wins, he'll take those treasures fairly, lead the woman home. The rest will seal in blood their binding pacts of friendship. Our people will live in peace on the rich soil of Troy. Our enemies sail home to the stallion land of Argos, the land of Achaea, where the women are a wonder. And so immediately then we get this sense that, oh, okay, so the two brothers have had a bit of an exchange, a fight, reminding us obviously of the linguistic exchange between Achilles and Agamemnon. And Menelaus then will be watching all of this as it unfolds. And obviously you have then the brother who is going to convince his brother Hector is going to convince Paris, let's do this thing. All right, let's do this thing. And it will then be for us. We'll move, and we're gonna hear now Hector, who is going to go out and make the comment in front of all of the troops what it is that's going on. I'm with you now at line 115 or so. A hushed silence held the ranks. Menelaus, whose cry could marshal armies, urged both sides. Now hear me out well. Such limited vengeance hurts me most of all, because Hector has said, hey, let's have these two guys fight, the challenge, right? And this is Menelaus now speaking, such limited vengeance hurts me most of all. By the way, this is Menelaus speaking now for the first time. But I intend that we will part in peace at last, Trojans and Achaeans. Look what heavy casualties you have suffered just for me. My violent quarrel in Paris who brought it on you all. Now we'll fight, and death to the one marked out for doom and death. With the rest, we'll part in peace. And soon, of course, the hope that maybe we'll be able to have some hope of, it's all gonna work out. Meanwhile, we're ready to meet Helen for the first time. We're at line 150. Iris, the goddess, comes in on Helen in her rooms, And Helen, we're told, this is significant for our symbolism, is weaving a growing web, a dark red folding robe, working into the weft the endless bloody struggles, stallion breaking Trojans and Argives armed in bronze had suffered, all for her at the god of battle's hands. This will, of course, tell us that she is making this web. Of course, she is the cause of all of the fighting that's been going on. And of course, we're going to see now a character that's described. Our poet will make none of our villains completely nasty like the Trojans. We're gonna respect them, and in some ways, some readers actually like Hector better than they like anybody else in the entire poem, right? Helen goes to the Scanian gates, that is to say, the gates above Troy. And the old men are sitting there for Troy. They no longer can fight. And they see Helen coming. And catching sight of Helen, I'm at line 185 or so, catching sight of Helen moving among the ramparts, they murmured one to another gentle, winged words. Who on earth could blame them? Ah, no wonder the men of Troy and Argives under arms have suffered years of agony all for her. Such a woman. Beauty. Terrible beauty. A deathless goddess, so she strikes our eyes. But still, ravishing as she is, let her go home in the long ships and not be left behind for us and our children down the years. An irresistible sorrow. We're told they murmured low, but Priam, raising his voice, called across to Helen. Notice how Priam speaks to Helen. Come over here, dear child. Sit in front of me so you can see your husband of long ago, your kinsmen and your people. I don't blame you. Notice, this is what Priam, the king of Troy, says. I don't blame you. I hold the gods to blame. Now, of course, the obvious question is, well, what about Paris? Do you hold Paris to blame? Never mentioned. Maybe we have in Priam a man who is going to be overindulgent with his son Paris, we might say. The gods, they are the ones who brought this war upon me, devastating war against the Achaeans. He then begins to ask for Helen to come over, and she says, notice the relationship, I revere you so, dear father, dread you too. If only death had pleased me then, grim death, that day I followed your son to Troy, forsaking my marriage bed, my kinsman, and my child. So we learn that Helen has a daughter, actually, my favorite, now full grown, and the lovely comradeship of women my own age. Death never came, so now I can only waste away in tears. But about your question, yes, I have the answer. He's asked, who is that man out there? It's Agamemnon. That man is Atreus' son, Agamemnon, lord of empires, both a mighty king and a strong spearman too. And he used to be my kinsman, whore that I am. No kidding. That's the language that Helen speaks about herself. And then the last line, she says, there was a world, or was it all a dream? You get this sense that Helen is she's confused, and she's in a lot of remorse about what's going on. She knows that a lot of people have died because of her and her liaison with Paris. We're going to find out later she doesn't even love Paris, if she ever did, right? And so we have this exchange with Priam, right? And then Priam is going to ask about, who are these people? And we mentioned Agamemnon, then we have Odysseus. There's this interesting story about Odysseus that's told where earlier on he was a part of the group to try, the entourage, the embassy, to try and get Helen back. And he was with Menelaus. And Menelaus was one kind of guy. He was kind of like very direct and that kind of thing. Odysseus, though, we're told in the story, Odysseus, he looked like he wasn't going to be a very good speaker. And then all of a sudden, man, he was an amazing speaker. So much so that they almost were determined to give Helen back and all of that, right? We finish with this exchange with Helen at roughly line line 280. That's where I'll take you. I wish I could read more for you, but I just don't have the time. And now she says, "I see them all." She's looking out on the wall. She's looking at the Greeks, the Achaeans who are fighting. And now I see them all, the fiery-eyed Achaeans. I know them all by heart, and I can tell their names. But two I cannot find, and they're captains of the armies. Castor, breaker of horses, and the hardy boxer, Polydeuces. And she says, my blood brothers. Mother bore them both. Perhaps they never crossed over from Lacedaemonian's lovely hills, or come they did, sailing here in a deep sea ships, but now they refuse to join the men in battle, dreading the scorn, the curses hurled at me. So Castor and Pollux, the Latin Roman name, she says, where are my brothers? I don't see them. And the poet says, so she wavered. But the earth already held them fast, long dead in the life-giving earth, the dear land of their fathers. This idea of the life-giving earth has been much debated. I'll let you look this one up. Scholars have often debated about what's going on with the life-giving earth. Is this an intended adjective, or is it proof that there was a certain kind, a guy named Perry made this argument, that there's a certain kind of formulaic adjectival use that's being used. I'll let you do your own research on that one. Priam is then called to the front, and there at the front, he has to be a part of the arrangement for the fight. He says it this way. I'm at line 335 or so. If Paris brings Menelaus down in blood, he keeps Helen himself and all her wealth. This is, by the way, the agreement for Agamemnon as he prays to Zeus. If Paris brings Menelaus down in blood, he keeps Helen himself and all her wealth, and we sail home in our racing deep-sea ships. But if red-haired Menelaus brings down Paris, the Trojans surrender Helen and all her treasures, and they pay us reparations, fair and fitting, a price to inspire generations still to come. But if Priam and Priam's sons refuse to pay, refuse me, Agamemnon, with Paris beaten down, then I myself will fight it out for the ransom. I'll battle here to the end of our long journey. And then finally, he will say it as he ends this. He says, calling on Zeus, whichever contenders trample on this treaty first, spill their brains on the ground as this wine spills, they would pour out a libation. Theirs, their children's too, their enemies rape their wives. So, I mean, you get a sense already of what's going on in this time period when battle and fighting is a brutal affair where children are killed. Hector's own son will be killed at the end of this. And where all kinds of terrible things happen in battle. And both sides agree, okay, this is what we're going